What's good, Illini Nation? It's your man, Deon Thomas, back for year 2 of Champagne on Ice. Champagne on Ice is brought to you by the Field of 68 Media Broadcasting, as well as my partners at Bet River Sportsbook. Without those two companies, you do not get to spend this time with me and my first guest of the season. 20 years he has been the voice of Fighting Illini sports. You heard me, ladies and gentlemen. Fighting Illini sports, both football as well as basketball. It's my cohort, my partner in crime, Mr. Brian Barnhart. Welcome, my friend, to your first time, and especially not your last, on Champagne on Ice.
Yeah, how about that? Yeah, it's great to be with you, and thank you for the kind introduction. And gee, I'm forgetting how many years you've been with me now on the broadcasts. I've had started with Stephen Bardo and Jerry Hester, and then you and Doug, and Trent Beacham's done some. So we've had a little bit of everybody. But it's how many years now for you?
This is year 5.
5, okay.
It's amazing how quickly it goes by. And then, of course, when you have COVID, sandwiched in between there, you never know. It just goes by so quickly. So first, I guess, how does it feel to be back on the sideline in the State Farm Center?
Well, I've already noticed, Deon, and I know you've seen a couple of practices too, where you actually feel like you're part of what's going on. I mean, last year was weird for everybody. We all know it. You and I broadcasting in an empty State Farm Center.
Yes.
And we could pipe in all the fake crowd noise and the cardboard cutouts and everything else, but and you can make it sound realistic enough in our headsets. But having the fans back for the first time in Indianapolis for the Big Ten tournament, and now having them back this year, it's just going to make such a huge difference. Being able to be courtside, you know how it is. You see and feel the emotion of the team and the players and how they're feeling about as the game is going on. They're in a war. They're in a fight, and you can feel much more part of that. I felt more like just an innocent bystander last year, being so far away from the court, unable to interact on a daily basis with the players or the coaches, or pick Brad Underwood's mind or one of the assistants. And we didn't have that last year, and it just felt really weird. And so it's great being able to go to a couple of practices already, talk to the guys on the staff, see how they're feeling about the season. It just makes a big, big difference.
I agree with you 100% on that. I was talking to Coach this past weekend when we were down in Champaign, and that was one of the things we talked about. Was I told him now he has less of a rear end to walk across in front of you and I, but I am so glad to be right next to him again, to feel what it is to be in the game, and to feel what it is to see those guys coming, walking past you as they're going to the floor, because it was so strange being so far away from the action that it's just amazing to be back. We made it through COVID, and now we get to enjoy some Illini basketball. And speaking of Illini basketball, as you mentioned, we've both had an opportunity to watch those guys play and practice. What do you think so far?
Well, I like what I see. And I know that Brad is probably still trying to figure out exactly what rotation he's going to move guys in and out. I mean, you would think, obviously, Kofi, you know what you've got there. Curbelo, you know what you have with Trent. But then, what do you do going forward? Do you start Grandison? Do you start Hutchison? Do you throw DeMonte in there? Seems like every year we don't start with DeMonte in the lineup. And then as things go along, about the first month in, he's in the lineup and he never comes out. So that's going to be interesting. I'm just so impressed with their length, their speed, their size, the ability to shoot. We shot it really well, as you know, Deon, very well from 2-point land. I mean, between Kofi and Io driving to the basket and Georgie around the basket, et cetera, we could score pretty easily 2 points, but 3-point shooting can come and go. DeMonte had a great year 3-point shooting. Trent can get going, but I think we've added even more guys like Plummer and Hutchison and others that can shoot the three. I just think it's even more of a dangerous team than we had last year. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, because I thought it's a little bit, we got a glimpse of what it will be like when Io was out with that injury last year with the face injury, what it could be with Curbelo taking over at the point. And, that combination of Kofi and Curbelo and other guys stepping up into various roles. I think it became even a little more of a balanced team overall, because I think last year at times it was almost like, okay, Io, it's your time, go do it. And you want him to do that, but it was almost like we fell into the habit of just deferring to him and letting him take over. And I think we saw in that stretch last year that it can be done without him. And now you've added these other pieces, Omar Payne and Plummer, et cetera, which I think will make us an even deeper team.
Oh, and I agree with you 100%. I think this team on paper, we'll see how they continue to gel together, as you mentioned. But I think on paper right now, this is one of the best teams we've had in a very long time. And I think we're definitely better than what we were last year. You lose a big piece like Io, and I think this is why a lot of the experts have dropped us out of the top 10. But I agree. I think we are a more balanced team. I love our shooting, as you mentioned, bringing in Plummer and, of course, Granderson, and now having Hutchison back, who's also a career 40+% three-point shooter. We've added so much, and that's not even mentioning our freshmen, who are all extremely good shooters. So on paper, right now, we are better. But I'll tell you this, I'm sure Coach is happy to have the issues that he's having right now of not knowing who those next guys are, because we are so deep across the board. Now, let's take a step back. You've been here 20 years. So in this 20 years, that means you have seen some of the absolute best teams that we've had. I mean, of course, you came after that 89 Flying Illini team, but you were here for the 01, the 02 Big Ten champions, 03, the 05 team that made it to the national championship. If you look at this team, where would you slot them? And I know it's early, so I'm not holding you to this, but where would you slot them on paper?
Yeah, it's hard to the 05 team, as you know, was those 5 starters. And then you had a couple of complementary pieces. You had, a couple of guys that could come off the bench, Jack Ingram, for instance, or you could have Brian Randall or whoever come off the bench, Rich McBride. They could fill a few minutes, but you had that core 5. You mentioned the 89 team. That's what this team reminds me more of, is just across the board, their size and depth and speed and athleticism. So it's probably closer to the 89 team. I think it's got the potential of that 01 team as well, because you had some big guys. You had Archibald, you had a Sean Harrington who could really hurt you from the outside. You just go down the list, Brian Cook. It reminds me personnel-wise more like the 01 team that made it to the Elite Eight in that regard, but also with the talent of the 89 team. The 05 team wasn't all that deep, but the starters were so good. I mean, every game, Deon, as you know, we played the same 5 guys. I mean, it never changed. I don't know if we're not going to have that this year. I think that could change. I could be wrong. There may be a lineup that settles in, it becomes obvious, but I don't know in this particular year. I think the parts are pretty interchangeable.
I'd agree with you 100%. And one of the greatest things about it is not just the depth of this team, not just the size of this team. They have added, as you mentioned, the shooting. I mean, you take that 89 team. We didn't have the shooting that I believe this team will have. I mean, you mentioned Sean Harrington. Sean was a great shooter, but now you add to this team about 4 or 5 guys that can really knock down the outside shot. So this is really a mishmash of our former great teams, because I think our starting 5 is going to be really good, not as good as maybe that 05 team, but we got a point guard on this team that I think I'd match up against any point guard that we've had in Illinois history.
Yeah, you think about the great Bruce Douglas, you think about in that era how great he was with the basketball. You think about a Larry Lubin going back to the early days of Lou Henson. You think about Chester Frazier and what he brought as a point guard. Curbelo, I think, could be the best of all of those guys. And he's already named the Cousy Award. So that tells you right there that people know. And there were plays last year, as you know, Deon, we were like did he really just do that? I mean, how did he do that? I mean, he threaded the needle, and sometimes it was a little scary. He would drive in there. He didn't always know where he was going. You weren't sure what the end result was going to be, but he got better at that as the year went on. And we saw down the stretch in those games, I forget what his 12 points a game or something like that down the stretch, and 4, 5, 6 assists a game. He was spectacular. So he's going to have a fantastic year. And the fun part, Deon, this year is he's going to get a chance to do it in front of fans, which I know there would have been a great love affair last year with that team and the Illini fans, but we couldn't see each other. And so it was kind of a long distance relationship, if you will.
Yeah, it's going to be great watching. I mean, you mentioned the Cousy Award. You don't get put on that list unless you're one of the top point guards in the country.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've had some conversations with some friends of mine that are now NBA scouts that have seen him play and that have saw various other teams, because there were some some articles that came out that didn't even list him in the top 5 for point guards in the country. And so I've talked to a couple of my buddies that have gone around and that have seen Illinois and seen some of the other point guards that have been ranked ahead of him. And they've literally told me, Deon, he's the best I've seen. He's the best in the country, which is huge for us because, yes, we changed his nickname from Bello to El Mago. We took the name from Javi Baez in Chicago because this kid was absolutely spectacular with a lot of the things that he's done. And you've seen him in practice as I have this year. One of his crutches or his kryptonite last year was the fact that he couldn't shoot the basketball. And people knew that. He's been shooting lights out so far this year.
Yeah, no, if he shoots even half as good as he did last year, and he struggled from 3. I mean, we all know he did. I was just looking at the numbers. I think he was 16% from 3. So he just didn't shoot it that much. We didn't need him to do that.
True.
This year, if he can add that to his game, wow. I mean, the sky's the limit for this guy. And in the tournament, the teams that make a run are the teams that have a great point guard.
Yes. And
you've got to have those guys on the floor, 1 or 2 of them, 2 preferably if you can, to make that big difference. And I think he's gonna take another step up. I still remember, Deon, I don't know if you did the game or Doug, but there was one of the games we lost in January at home, Maryland or Ohio State, and he had made some mistakes down the stretch, and while everybody was back in the locker room, I always remember him coming out by himself, and he just sat on the floor for several minutes under the basket, kind of collecting his thoughts. And then he started working on his, drives to the basket and his pull-up jumpers and his different facets of his game. And I knew right then he was going to be okay because, he could have sat in the locker room and just stewed about it. But he came out, he started working on his game right away. And I thought he kind of grew from that experience.
And I agree. And I think that's what's special about him. This kid has amnesia. He has early onset amnesia. He makes a mistake and he's right back in there. He doesn't harp on it as you've seen, especially last year, as some young people would do is, you hang your head on it. So you turn one mistake into 2 or possibly 3 mistakes. He did not do that. And what I enjoyed was watching Coach give him the leeway to grow. And I think this is really going to shine for him this year because that kid is special. Now, we all know the mountain that we have in the middle, Kofi Cockburn. There's not another player in the state like him, or in the country like him, let alone the state. But like you said, the combination they formed last year was absolutely amazing. And I expect it to be, even better this year. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, the practice you and I were at the other day, we saw a couple of those, little wraparound passes where I was like, where'd the ball go? It's like a magician, which is the El Mago thing. I mean, and they've really, I think, become connected at a very high level, even more so than maybe Iowa was. I mean, Iowa was so dominant offensively, he could drive in and get a pull-up basket, and Curbelo may get there eventually, but Iowa was one of the guys you wanted to score. Curbelo had that. If Curbelo could score a few, that was great. But man, did he distribute the ball, and man, did he get it in the right spot to Kofi, and how they found each other and how he finished. I mean, it was highlight reel after highlight reel with those two. And that's what everybody, I think, is really excited about. And those are the guys that, you've got great leadership. You know how it is on a team. You've got great leadership with Trent, and you've got DeMonte, and you've got the upperclassmen. But there's a reason Brad Underwood took Curbelo and Kofi to media day in Indianapolis, because those are the two guys together that are what are going to really make this team special.
I agree 100%. One of the things I love about the two of them is that connection. And you're all right. I mean, he knows that there could be a pass, meaning Kofi knows that there could be a pass coming from anywhere. And, when you're somebody of his size, normally the hands are a thing that, we're not expecting him to make some of those catches. And, like I know his freshman year, we saw some of those bobble balls and drops and things like that. But we have not seen very many of those, even with the I don't want, for lack of a better word, flashy passes from Curbelo that he's actually caught, which has been great in watching those two grow their relationship. I know one of the things that you mentioned, Io was our closer, and people knew he was going to close, and and they still couldn't stop him. One of the things I think that makes us even more dangerous this year is Andre Curbelo will probably take over that closer role because he's the one that can get downhill and get to the basket. But I think the beauty that he brings, and I'd love to hear, your expertise on it, because you've seen some of these really great guards that we've had in the past, is not that he can just finish for himself, but he now opens up the entire floor because of his court vision.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, you can't, it's some guards, he's got the right size and speed to go in there too. But, some guards, they dribble in, and this is where he got into trouble a little bit last year, is he'd get almost too deep. He was like a bowling ball rolling in there among the bowling pins, and you didn't know where, who he was going to knock over. But yeah, his ability to see the floor and see things that most guards, I don't think, can see. And so if you're a defender, you've got to respect that if I don't cut him off, he's just going to go to the basket and hit a layup, which we saw a lot last year. But then somebody's going to have to help too, and that means somebody's going to be open. And when you talk about the opportunities of the shooters that we have with Plummer, and with if Goody gets out there, or if Podziemski gets out there, those guys are deadly. Yeah. And we saw them as the blue team on the scout team the other day, and they were, they were shooting lights out. So it was like, you've got all these different options that if you're a defender or a defensive team and a coach, you're like, well, who do I stop? Do I just let him go, or do I cut him off and then come off as somebody and help? And if I do, it's kind of a choose your poison kind of thing. So he's got that ability to make that happen.
Oh, he does. And one of the great things, I don't want to say great things. One of the things that hurt us last year, which I have seen in practice, is people would double team, triple team Kofi. Kofi has shown the ability to kick the ball out so far in practice that I've seen. So now you couple that with Curbelo doing what he does, get to the basket, can finish, can pass, get it to Kofi. If they triple team Kofi or even put 4 people on him the way Loyola did, he can kick the ball out to so many shooters. I mean, again, you've 20 years, you've been around a bunch of coaches. I know you're not a coach, but what I was.
Yeah.
Who do you guard? What do you do? I mean, you're lost.
Well, you've seen Brad Underwood before in practice. They'll work on certain plays like that, or trying to drive to the basket, and he'll say, that's a bucket. That's a bucket. That's a basket. It's there all day. And that's what I think you get with Kofi inside, and of course Curbelo going to the basket. You can put so many defenders in impossible situations that if you just do it over and over and over again, you're just going to have, basket after basket, because they don't know, who do you guard? That was the one thing with the starting 5 on the 05 team, going back to that. One night it might be Roger Powell. Another night, James Augustine could go off for 25. Or, D or Darren would do, one might have 8 points, but the other would have 20. You just never quite knew where it was coming from. And I think that's where Curbelo and Kofi are the anchors of this. Defensively, as you said, I don't know who you guard. If you're trying to really focus on those two, let's not let those two beat us. Well, how do you gum up Illinois' offense enough to stop a Trent Frazier from outside, or DeMonte from what he does, or Hutchison or Plummer, who gets off a really quick shot? You've seen it in practice. I mean, it gets in his hands, it's gone.
And man, it looks good every single time it leaves his hand. But that's one of those things that's really going to be a nightmare for coaches in the Big Ten is, as you mentioned, who do you guard? Who do you guard? Who do you stop? So I got this question for you. We've had the opportunity to, one, get to meet a lot of the players and be around them that we didn't have last year. We've had an opportunity to really get to see these guys play. If you had to pick one or two guys that you have seen a vast improvement in and that you're looking forward to see play, who would they be?
Wow. I thought Grandison made a big jump last year during the course of the year. I would expect him to take another jump, I think, now that he became a starter at the end of last year. I thought he just brought some real, and I know Brad was wrestling at the time with, do you start DeMonte with what he can do? Do you start Grandison? I just think his upside on the offensive end and his rebounding, not that DeMonte doesn't rebound, because he does, but I just thought he gave him a little more oomph at that position, I guess, overall. And so I'd be excited to see what his upside is. I don't know if he's going to play or not, but the freshman from Wisconsin, Pods, he's like this, and you know better than I do, but he looks to me like really, really strong for a freshman. I mean, he's already solid, and physically, he looks like a sophomore or junior already. And if he were to get in, I'd be interested to see what his growth spurt could be. I am interested to see what you're talking about with Kofi and throwing the ball back out, because, as a freshman, he would fumble it some. He would bring it down, which drove Brad crazy. Why are you 7 foot? You're bringing it down to where the little guys can get it. You know all about that. But then in that second year, he got better at catching it. And then towards the end of the year, he got better at kicking it back out. So if he can continue to do that, I'd love to see him add a 10, 12-foot jump shot, which would make him impossible to guard in that regard. So those guys I'm thinking of. Hutchison, I've seen enough in practice to know what he's capable of doing. I think people are going to have to give him a little grace at the beginning because he hadn't played a live game in 2.5 years or whatever. But I think I'm going to have fun watching his potential growth, what he brings to the table with his athleticism, shooting, and so forth. Because the coaches rave about him, and we've seen enough in practice to know that, hey, this guy's pretty darn good. So I think he could be one of those guys too that grows quite a bit.
Well, I'm gonna piggyback off of you. Austin Hutchison makes the game look so easy. The way he plays is just so smooth and effortless. And I told him that after the game, and he was like, "Well, I'm not. Well, not after the game, after practice." And he was like, "Well, I'm not there yet. I'm still working on my conditioning and things of that nature." So you're 100% right. Illini Nation, be patient. He's going to need time. But when Brian and I tell you, just as the coaching staff did, this kid's going to be very good for us. But you know who else I have fallen in love with last year moving into this year? I'm going to take the name the Hulk, and we're going to give it to Hawkins. What he is doing at 6'10", with his length, his athleticism, his ball handling, and to watch him from this skinny little kid last year in America, Illini Nation, he still isn't Kofi Coburn, but he's put on 20 pounds. He can take bumps now. And now to go along with his ability to shoot the ball, put it on the floor, and pass, I think he is going to make our offense that much better. We're going to look so much better because of his skill level, because of what he brings. Another person for me is Omar Payne. Oh my God. This kid's bounce off the floor is I mean, electrifying. He gets off the floor in a heartbeat. And I don't know how much of an offensive threat he'll be for us this year, but I will say this. He's going to block a lot of shots because of his timing and how quick, and he showed the ability to block shots with both hands. And what he did show me, and as I told him, I was like, when did this jump shot come out? Because I was just watching him as he was on the floor by himself shooting. And he shot really well from like 15 to 17 feet. So if he can knock that down or get to where he can knock that down consistently, then coach will have the ability to play him and Kofi.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I don't think anyone will get a layup at the basket. You know, we'll force teams to shoot jump shots the whole time. So watching those two, you know, do what they do. And you mentioned Pods, but you know who was most impressive to me over this weekend? And this is a freshman. And coach already said it, which I'm happy he has this issue. He was like, Deon, I don't know how much my freshmen are going to play this year because I don't have to depend on them because of what we have in front of them.
Right.
Luke Goody.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Brian, I was so excited watching this kid play. And he's put on weight as well. You know, they're both, he and Pods both look like sophomores.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know that you mentioned Payne. I know that coach has said before that he makes Kofi work every day in practice. So Kofi's going to get better because Omar's so long, and coach has said he gives Kofi some problems. So that's, you know, you're going to see some of the best guys in the country go at Kofi, and he's got a pretty good one as his backup already.
Exactly. And he brings an air of toughness, which is another thing that I like. But before we move on to our next topic, B, let me tell you guys a little bit about our partners over at Bet Rivers Sportsbook. If you haven't signed up with Bet Rivers yet, now's the time because they're offering a $250 match bonus for your first deposit. But what sets them apart is that they require just one play through to turn your bonus into cash money. With their new Rush Pay Instant Approval, withdrawing your winnings is safer, more secure, as well as more reliable. With basketball season tipping off, get in on the action by going to betrivers.com today or by downloading the BetRivers iOS app. Must be 21 years or older. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. But as we move into the next topic, B, I'd like to talk more so about the team. The recent rankings came up, and as I mentioned earlier, they have us ranked 11th. I will say I haven't done all of my homework yet on the other teams, especially not the Big Ten teams. And I know we have some good ones, but I don't know if we are the 11th ranked team behind Michigan, Purdue, and I believe Ohio State.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I thought just purely guessing, I was talking to Lauren Tate, longtime columnist here in Champaign. I was talking to him. He said, where do you think they're going to be ranked? I said, well, you know, I don't know, but I'd say somewhere between 8 and 12. I thought more closer to 8 than 12. Turned out I was right. As it turned out, 11th. What were they? 8, I think, last year at the start of the season. So, yeah, I don't. I mean, who knows? I mean, I didn't even remember we were picked 8th last year until I read it. Right. So I don't know if the preseason ratings mean a whole lot because nobody's played any games yet.
Exactly.
And that's where you get teams coming from 20 or 25 that zip all the way up to, you know, the top 10 because you just didn't expect them to do that well. So it's always a little bit of guesswork, but that was a little surprised they were behind, you know, since they so soundly beat Michigan last year in Ann Arbor. They beat Purdue, you know, they beat Ohio State in the Big Ten tournament. You'd think just out of that alone and Kofi coming back, they would be higher than those three, but I don't know, maybe Brad, you know a locker room better than I do. Maybe Brad's got a little bulletin board material here to start the year with to say, hey, you know, they don't even think we're good enough in the Big Ten. So I don't know.
You always want that bulletin board material. And I have to make a small correction. Ohio State is 17th. So we are ranked above Ohio State. So they have Michigan at 6, they have Purdue at 7, they have Illinois at 11, Ohio State 17, and Maryland at 21. But I still don't believe we are the third best team in the Big Ten. Yeah. I mean, if you look at some of the predictions and they have put out who is as far as the odds of being the Big Ten champs, we are almost it across the board. The other aspect, you may see Michigan up there, but I've seen where they really are leaning heavy on us. It's so good to see. And you've been here 20 years. I remember when everything was great with Illinois. It's great to see Coach Underwood be coy about how good he thinks his team can be.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think he's being honest when he's trying to figure out the rotation. I don't know if he knows exactly what it's going to be overall, but yeah, I think, he's good at that about he pushes the right buttons. Mm-hmm. He's a lot like, I always thought when he first came, I thought he reminded me a lot of Bill Self and how he handles his team, how he connects with them day to day. He can be tough on them, and Bill could be tough. Bruce could be tough too. They're all tough, in practice too.
That's called coaching.
That's called coaching. I mean, your Coach Lou was a tough guy in practice. I mean, but just with the intensity of what they demand, the culture that they want to create, Underwood reminded me, and still does, of how Bill Self was in practice, the expectations he set. And so I just think he connects well with these guys. I think he does a great job with the media, kind of like, Bill Self did, but also understanding, promoting, projecting optimism and confidence, knowing where he wants to go, but also not being braggadocious about it either, to understand, we've got something pretty good here. We're building a culture, but, to this point, a reminder, guys, we haven't been past the second round of the NCAA yet since I've been here. So I think he's got that. He's got dual. He enjoys the expectations, but also knowing that we fell short last year. We want to go further this year. I think he's playing it just right.
I would agree with you 100%. But it's still fun to watch his face and the excitement that you can see bubbling inside of him, but yet he's not able to go because, like you said, he's still figuring it out, and he's still trying to figure out what piece of the puzzle fits where. You have guys that are, a lot of new faces that are going to have to find their way, find their role. So it's going to be, possibly a little bumpy in the beginning, and he knows that, but the potential is there, which is exciting. And especially after, the off season that we had. I mean, we lost 3 coaches, and we bring in, and I'll say 2 new coaches and then promote 1. I know you and I have both had a great time of meeting Jeff Alexander. Would you like to say a few things as far as what about what he brings? I think, and I know Jeff was a great hire to elevate him. It was kind of a no-brainer, in my opinion, for Coach.
Well, if you're looking at, and you've been in coaching, the different roles that guys can play. I think Stephen Gentry, who went back to Gonzaga, as we know, was really a great X and O guy. I mean, he, designed the offense, designed a lot of the free flowing, you could see his impact. But what people don't realize is that even though Jeff Alexander could not be a coach or go out and recruit, he was an assistant to the head coach. And he was also a sounding board for Brad. He's known him forever. Yeah. And he's one of those guys that can tell Brad, hey, I don't think this is right. I think we need to do this. And Brad will respect his difference of opinion maybe, or his thoughts to add into what he's thinking. Mm-hmm. And so I think Jeff's not afraid to do that. But Jeff, really from even though he wasn't a coach, I think in the background had a lot of impact offensively and defensively with schemes, and he understands what Brad wants to do. And so, he just didn't have the recruiting piece with him, right, from just being an assistant to the head coach, but he's been an assistant before. He was at Marty Simmons at Evansville. Mm-hmm. He had coached there. So he knows the recruiting process. So he's got that part down. His dad, of course, is a Hall of Fame high school coach, as we all know, from Lincoln in the state of Illinois. So he's got some credentials there. He's well known across the state and just a great guy overall. And I think I was really happy for him. He really fits into that Stephen Gentry role that Stephen had when he came from originally. And then, you've got Tim Anderson, of course, who knows Chicago very well. You got to have that on your staff at Illinois. And then, of course, Chester, who everybody came to love for his tenacity and his bulldog relentlessness. One of the most, still to this day, of all the guys I've called, still one of the toughest customers I've ever run across. I mean, he literally, Al Martindale was trying to take him out of a game. Chester, you're hurt. You got to come out. And he was like waving off Al. He's waving off Coach Weber. He's waving, I'm not coming out. I mean, he showed up. He played hurt more than anybody realizes. And I think he brings that same toughness and determination to recruiting, to coaching. He expects it out of his guys to come that way. And I think it's a great fit to have him back as well. Not just because he's a former Illini, which is great, but for what he brings to the table and his tenacity and his devotion to hard work. And I think we're going to see that impact as we go along too. So I think it's a great staff.
Well, I'll tell you this. I wasn't sure after Orlando and Chin and Coach Gentry left if we could upgrade our staff. I believe we have upgraded our staff. I mean, let's be honest. There's not very many recruiters in the country like Orlando. But he wanted to go home to be with his mentor, the guy that brought him in the game. I get it. But what Chester Frazier has done and has brought to the table immediately after landing in Champaign, of course, he did a great job at Virginia Tech, did an excellent job at Kansas State. But what he brought to the table immediately, I agree with you 100%. And one of the things that I also love that he's going to bring, and you know this, you've been around enough coaches. Coaches are going to recruit players that are like them. So his players, and I'm expecting the players that he's going to bring in are going to have that same bulldog, dogged mentality that he has, that same toughness, that same grit. And that's what you need in the Big Ten if you're going to be successful. And you mentioned Tim. I've known Tim Anderson for years. So well respected in the city. And what a lot of people don't understand, they just say, yeah, recruit Chicago. It's not as easy as it sounds to recruit Chicago. Chicago has factions. And pockets where some coaches can't recruit other. Tim Anderson doesn't have that. He has garnered the respect of coaches both north as well as south, as well as on the west side of Chicago. He can walk into any gym. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to get every kid out of Chicago, Illini Nation, so relax. But he has the ability to be able to go in there in every gym and give us a shot at the kids that we want. And that's the part that I love. And, and I've known Jeff for so long. I love Jeff, not just as a coach, but as a person. I mean, he's going to be amazing for us. Well, he's already been amazing for us. And so now in this new role as a coach, he's going to be even more amazing for us. So we're about to move into the season, B. We got our exhibition games coming up. Of course, everybody is expecting us to beat St. Francis by 100 points. It's never that easy. And here you go. You got a former player telling you right now, Illini Nation, it's never that easy to just go out and walk over guys. This is kind of St. Francis's national championship game for one. But for two, we again, as we mentioned earlier, we have a lot of moving parts, and we're still trying to figure out how things are going to work and how to shake out and which puzzle pieces to connect together. What are you expecting to see this weekend, Brian?
Yeah, I think what you said is exactly right. These teams, and I did some small college basketball in Oklahoma when I was living out there 30 years ago. And we had a NAIA school, which is where St. Francis is, from Joliet. And I remember we went in and we played Oregon State in an early season game at the BYU Cougar Classic. We were a late addition. One of the teams canceled. We went in there and we had been NAIA national runners-up. I think the year before, we had a really good team. And we clobbered Oregon State. It was like, for our team, it was like a huge deal. Whether Oregon State was any good or not, this was a Power 5 Pac-12 team, and we wanted to beat them really, really bad. And we did. and we took on BYU and didn't win. That was 30 years ago. But the mentality I'm talking about, that's what St. Francis is coming in with, is whatever game they play the rest of the year, they can always say as a player, hey, I played against Illinois and they were really, really good. And we played at the State Farm Center floor. And no matter what the score winds up being, for them, they got nothing to lose. And so at the same time, Illinois is trying to, as you said, figure out all the different pieces. And so you got that dynamic. Illinois should win the game, there's no doubt.
Right.
And they should win a lot of these early games, exhibition or otherwise, till you get to, the trip to Marquette. They're going to have some games. Mm-hmm. But it's all about, and coaches say it all the time, and it sounds like a cliche, but it really is about us these first 3 or 4 weeks, into late October and early November, because we're trying to figure out what we've got, where you can plug these different guys in, what's his role going to be. We bring him off the bench early in the first half, bring him off later, who do we sub for who? Brad's even mentioned this, and this, Deon, that he even in those games, especially for the young guys, he wants to know where to line up for the national anthem.
Exactly.
And where to check in at the scorer's table. Now he doesn't have many guys that way, but there were some guys, some teams he's had that were really young. They didn't know where to check in at the scorer's table. Basic things like that you try to get your routine down before these regular season games start. So it's all about Illinois in this game, but you got to remember that these other teams are like, hey, this is a chance for us, to, get some real attention for our school. And I think back to that game we played against Eastern Illinois in Charleston, and that's a little bigger school than St. Francis. That was just an exhibition game for charity. And how fired up they were to play us. And that wasn't our great team that first year for us, but it didn't matter. It was Illinois. And so it's the same thing that you're going to see these first 2 exhibition games. But it's all about us and how we develop and what we do. But certainly got to keep in mind it's a big deal for the other team.
Oh, no doubt. And, when these teams come in and they look at the name on the front, they're really trying to come from. And again, especially since Illinois is getting the press that they're getting, and that team is within the state. Again, as you mentioned, they're an NAIA team, but man, what they would they'd have such a wind behind their back, even though it's an exhibition game, as EIU did, to knock off an Illinois team. So, B, I want to thank you so much for this opportunity, for coming in to sit down with me. I wanted to have you on last season, but I appreciate you being my first guest of season 2 of Champagne on Ice. As always, I want to give you an opportunity to address Illini Nation. Well,
thank you, Deon. Looking forward to working with you again, and it'll be coming up here real fast. We'll get the football, basketball overlap 6 weeks here coming up, so I'm looking forward to it.
Well, the pleasure is mine. So, Illini Nation, we are going to sign off. And again, this is your man in the middle, Deon Thomas. I am truly, truly appreciative for all those that have come out to join us. Remember, you can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. Please like, subscribe, and leave a message for me. Willing to always hear what the good and the bad, because it helps me improve. But the podcast Champagne on Ice is brought to you by the Field of 68 Media. Those are my friends. Check them out. Like and subscribe to their podcasts as well, because they carry a ton of great content from all around the country. And also to my partners at Bet Rivers Sportsbook. Couldn't do it without you guys. Appreciate your support. Peace out, Illini Nation.